Hi, everybody. This is Joel Butterly. I'm the co-founder of Scholar Launch, and today will be the first video in a series of videos about the importance of conducting academic research in high school and the relationship of that academic research to the college admissions process. Today, we're going to cover the why of academic research, as in why is it important, the when should you do it, the how do you find these opportunities, and the what do you do actually after you finish your research. Do you submit for publication? Do you submit for different competitions? How do you represent this experience in your applications, et cetera, et cetera? As I said, this will be a video series, so please make sure to hit the subscribe button below and so that we can go through this journey together. This is an exciting new area of secondary and post-secondary education. Advanced academic research is new, it's exciting, it's something that a lot of students are starting to kind of get into, and hopefully this will be a helpful sort of first tool in helping you navigate it. So before we dive in, I wanted to introduce myself a little bit better. As I said, my name is Joel Butterly. I am the co-founder of Scholar Launch. I was born in the Boston area, or just outside of Boston. I actually grew up for the latter half of my adolescence in Vermont. I attended a very good public school called Hanover High School in Hanover, New Hampshire. Fun fact, Norwich, Vermont, and Hanover, New Hampshire are one of the few school districts that share across borders, share a high school. And afterwards, I attended Dartmouth College, where I had 2 majors and a minor, mostly focusing on international studies, politics, and ethical philosophy. And then after that, I attended Yale Law School. And it was actually while in college and then further in law school that I got the idea for an organization like Scholar Launch. Fundamentally, the purpose of the organization is to give precocious high school students who would otherwise not really have an advanced way to engage with their interests aside from taking online classes, to give those students an opportunity to engage with their interests in a much more sophisticated manner. That is to say, when I was applying to college, and indeed this was true, a student who was interested in political science could do little more than try to get into like a local college class. There weren't online college classes at the time because that's how old I am, apparently. The central issue was that, if you had a kind of particular academic passion, there wasn't an opportunity for you to expand on that passion at a very complex level, the way that a college student might, or the way that a graduate student might. So the simplest way of understanding the program is it's an opportunity for high school students to do things that only college and mostly graduate students have the opportunity to do, which is to say, conduct original research in an area of interest of them and write papers and potentially even get published in that given field. So that was sort of the very high level behind the organization. For my personal story, it was actually quite relevant. When I was applying to colleges, one of the things that was tough was, at least from an application standpoint, was I didn't really have anything that differentiated me. There were things that were solid about the application. I had, nearly perfect test scores. I think I had like a 3.98 GPA out of 4.0. So I had 1 or 2 A minuses, but was, very close to the top of the class. And I was a talented debater. I was a national champion, and ranked almost certainly in sort of the the top percentile of national debaters in policy debate. But the issue is that so were thousands of other students, right? So the thousands and thousands of other students had great GPAs and great test scores, and thousands of other students, or maybe not thousands, but hundreds of other students, were some form of a debate champion. I was in policy debate, but there were also debate champions in Lincoln Douglas and public forum and extemporaneous speaking and Model UN and Model Congress, parliamentary debate, worlds. So it just the list kind of goes on and on. And so the issue there is, how does an admissions office differentiate between students with these kinds of backgrounds? And the answer is that for the most part they don't, or if they do so by making what might be a relatively arbitrary decision between this person is number 5 in the US and this person is number 1 in California. I choose the person who's number 5 in US. Maybe that's right, maybe it's not. But when you're choosing across formats and with all of these different kinds of competitions, it's very hard to differentiate yourself through kind of competitions. whether that be debate, whether that be the math Olympiad, the physics Olympiad, you name it. There's just too many of them, and admissions officers don't necessarily know about them. So when I was applying, that was the kind of core issue. And fundamentally, although my college admissions process was a success, I was admitted to Dartmouth. I managed to get in some other really great schools. I didn't ultimately get into sort of my first or second choice schools. Granted, they were very, very competitive. But a big part of that, in looking back sort of in retrospect, a big part of that is that there was just not really any significant part of my application that was going to differentiate me. Now, my interests were very clearly in this sort of law and political science space. And so if at that time I had the opportunity to go farther in those interests, so farther than debate would have let me gone, farther than an online class would have let me gone, perhaps it might have ended a little bit differently. I don't mean any of this to sound like I have, a chip on my shoulder about this. Again, it ended great, and I'm extremely grateful for the education that I've gotten, and unbelievably fortunate. But at the time, one of the things that did occur to me was I had failed to differentiate myself, and so part of Scholar Launch is there's kind of you can think of it as sort of the two biggest missions. One of them is this sort of pure educational mission of giving students the opportunity to go farther in their research interests, to go farther with their passions. And the other component of it is this is a very meaningful experience extracurricularly for high school students, and an opportunity for them to differentiate themselves from other students. That is to say, if you have two students, both of whom are interested in public health, and one of them has done a school group, or kind of a common summer program, and the other one has written and published an article on a pertinent public health issue, like the effectiveness of quarantine during COVID-19. Or something along those lines. It's that latter student who's really going to stand out to the admissions office, not the former student. And so part of it is also about helping you stand out. So that also kind of ties into what universities, generally speaking, are looking for in a candidate, and why research is the ideal method to help students stand out. And so this sort of is the crux of the why component of video one. And then next time we'll cover the when. So the admissions offices fundamentally at their core are looking for kind of two primary variables. Now, this is an oversimplification, but sort of distilling this down to its most fundamental elements, admissions offices care about two things. The first is they care if you are academically qualified. Academic qualifications are a function of grades and test scores and things like that. Most people are familiar with academic qualifications and understand it to a point. They don't necessarily understand all the nuance within it. Things like, is it always better to have higher grades and test scores, or is there a curve of diminishing marginal returns, or how many APs should you take, and which subjects should you take, and there's all that nuance. But fundamentally, let's just say that it's a binary variable. You either are or you are not academically qualified for the school that you are applying to. That's variable one. Variable two, which in recent years has actually been doing a lot more of the heavy lifting. And the reason that I know that is from a variety of anecdotal evidence, but also a lot of reports from former admissions officers that estimate that anywhere between 40 to 60% of applicants to these highly competitive schools are academically qualified. So, for example, I once spoke with an admissions officer former admissions officer from Stanford, who said that he estimated that anywhere between 60 and 70% of the students that applied were academically qualified for Stanford. So, of that population, maybe 1 in 10 are actually being admitted. And so that's the sort of second variable comes into play. The second variable is, are you an expert at something? That is to say, have you identified a passion or interest early on in high school? Have you developed it farther than anyone else? If the answer to are you academically qualified is yes, and if the answer to are you the most advanced student in X, where X is your chosen area of interest or passion, maybe it's public health, maybe it's political science, maybe it's chemistry, maybe it's computer science, et cetera. If the answer to that is yes as well, then your chances at highly selective universities is extremely good. That is sort of the key. People usually respond to that. Well, what about being well-rounded? And my response is, well, being well-rounded is not only not true now. I mean, the requirements to be well-rounded is not only not true now. I very much doubt that it was ever true. Schools don't necessarily want well-rounded applicants so much as they want well-rounded classes. So they want a school that is well-rounded in its interest areas and its peculiarities and its personal experiences, et cetera. But the individual students they want excellent students who have excelled. And so typically what that means is that they want students who have specialized in something. You don't frequently see students who are effectively dilettantes getting into top schools unless they have some, particular personal relationship to the school. What you see, generally speaking, is the students who get into these schools are highly specialized in one or two areas and who have developed a true expertise for their age range. Now, in my mind, there are basically three ways of demonstrating expertise through activity. So ultimately, it's going to be your activities list that demonstrates your expertise. And again, I'm oversimplifying for the purposes of this video because I don't want to make it too long. But fundamentally, the types of extracurricular activities I have seen that demonstrate expertise, or a better way of describing them is these are the kind of capstone experiences. So you've done the local, school groups. Maybe you've done a summer camp. Maybe you've done, sort of a community service organization related to your interests. And so this last category is sort of the final capstone experiences. And they basically boil down to three categories. You have internships, real internships, which means that you can demonstrate tangibly what you've actually done with your time, right? If you do an internship at Google in high school, nobody thinks that you're actually contributing meaningfully. So you have to be able to prove that there's a meaningful and quantifiable contribution to the organization. That's one. Number two is entrepreneurship generally. So that would be starting your own organization, whether it's a for-profit or not-for-profit. That's quite rare. It's unusual to see students who have done that. And I would argue that between internships and entrepreneurship, maybe 40 to 50% of students, should be considering that based on their interest, right? If your interest is history, doing a program in entrepreneurship is unlikely to be pertinent to a passion in history. That's not necessarily, I'm sure there are ways of doing a history-based nonprofit, but generally speaking, that's not going to be the most relevant. And the last is academic research, advanced academic research, which showcases an academic expertise well beyond your age range. And this, I think, part of the reason that Scholar Launch focuses so much on academic research is because I think that this is applicable to 95+% of the student population. And indeed, I think that if a student is looking to differentiate themselves in their area of interest, one of the best ways of doing it is to showcase that they are able to engage with their topic of interest. Again, whether it be biology or chemistry or political science, whether they're able to engage with this area of interest at a level that normally only college students or graduate students would get the opportunity to. And so that is part of the reason that we started there, is because it's applicable to such a large population of students. But that's sort of how you demonstrate expertise. So again, to summarize, the admissions process, when it's distilled to its most fundamental components, are you academically qualified? Have you developed expertise in something? There is a lot of additional nuance here. This is not an explanation of the admissions process in its totality by any means, but it is a very good generalized and motivating principle from which to derive an effective college admissions strategy. And indeed, that's part of the reason that we started Scholar Launch, was that we thought that it, in addition to offering an incredible educational opportunity for students, also afforded them great opportunities related to the college admissions process. In any event, that is the sort of the why behind advanced research. I would add a couple of other things, which is that advanced research is extremely useful because it teaches students how to do academic writing, which for the most part, I think that high school curricula are inadequate at teaching. So learning how to do effective academic writing from somebody who's an expert, which usually means somebody who's a PhD or taught at the collegiate level, so somebody who's taught at a college level, is incredibly valuable in terms of both your own intellectual development. It's also incredibly valuable in terms of your effectiveness as a student. So being able to produce higher quality work throughout high school as well. So I think that that's a real meaningful component. And the last thing I'll say is, generally speaking, the professors that do this kind of work, both at our organization and others, they're not doing it because they're just trying to make money. Most professors aren't really motivated that much by money in the first place. I come from an academic family. Both my parents are professors, and my wife's father's professor, and so father-in-law's a professor would be another way of saying that. But it's mostly because they really want to work with just precocious, really motivated students. You'd be surprised, even at the most kind of selective, ambitious schools, or selective schools with the most ambitious students. You find a lot of students who aren't actually all that motivated. And so it's refreshing for professors to actually have that opportunity to work with those students. And so I say that because for students who do well, it's not uncommon for them to ask and to receive letters of recommendation. The important thing you should understand is that letters of recommendation can never be purchased. They must be earned. Anybody who tells you that you can purchase letters of recommendation is offering you something that is without value or potentially a scam. So it is so just to kind of set the tone there. But I do think that working very hard and trying to get a letter of recommendation from a professor goes a long way, because one of the major considerations admissions offices are having when they're evaluating applications is the student going to succeed here? Is the student going to come here and succeed? We know they can succeed at a high school. Can they succeed at this college? And if there's a professor who's willing to attest to the fact this student is as good or if not better than my students at insert good school, then that goes a long way to allaying those concerns by the admissions office. So in any event, that is the why. I hope you will join us next time for the when, where we talk about the timing and the planning of these advanced research opportunities. And just to quickly summarize, my name is Joel. I am the co-founder. We talked a little bit about what matters in the admissions process. That's the academic qualifications and whether you are an expert. And then we talked a little bit about why these advanced research opportunities are optimal at demonstrating expertise, particularly within an academic context, and are applicable to a wide range of students. So I hope this was helpful, and looking forward to seeing you again for video 2.